Hey all, this is Oakshire, aka Dorban, one of the EQ2 emulator content developers. And this is part 2 of a content development demo, or a how-to on how to handle certain processes within rebuilding the game. If you haven't seen part 1, recommend it if you're interested in learning some of the basic stuff I'll be talking about today. But you can certainly jump in with this and see kind of what's going on in the back end of recreating this emulator. So, like I said, this one is talking primarily about NPC dialogue, how it relates to building quests, and just the basic scripting components that go along with just making an NPC do what it does in the world. Over here, like I have here on the right, I'm going to talk about the tools. For instance, the main thing I'm going to be using today is our database editor, which is a web-based browser where we do a lot of our content development. Also, I'll be using Notepad++, which is a great tool if you're looking to sift through lines of text to pull out certain words if you're searching for something in particular. We've also got a dialogue parser tool, which is developed for EQ2EMU, which can take a log file and pull out the conversations the player has with an NPC and then help recreate that whole process within the emulator. This is also built in right now to our database editor, so I'll most likely be using it out of here, but we have a standalone tool to do that. Dialog Module, that is more of a rule set that we use in order to facilitate the conversations with NPCs. So for instance, this isn't necessarily a tool I'll be whipping around, it's more of like, this is how I need to program this in order to make it work within the game. And then just some other little things. For instance, if I had some Everquest 2 log files, I can pull out the dialogues that way with the parser, as well as I can use it for all sorts of other things, be it damage, be it spell descriptions that are projected to the player, that kind of thing. And then also, just to have as a historical reference, I always reference the Prima Guide, which is the original game guide that was released in 2004, just prior to release of the game. So it has a lot of really complete content for the early part of the game and is a really great reference historically. So, like I said, we're going to talk about NPC dialogue, and I'm going to build off of what I used in part 1 of this series. So just to kind of dig in, let's pull up where we were previously. So I had us in Temple Street, which is a Freeport district for Ratonga and Gnome races. So refugees coming in off the Isle of Refuge would come here, they'd learn the ropes, and then they become citizens before they actually get into the city. So over here on the left, as you can see, I have a gnome character, and we were talking to Sparzit, Cogsnibble. We are going to use him as our primary focus for rebuilding dialogue. So let's just go ahead, I'm going to expand this, and we're going to come into our database editor. So just to kind of reiterate from the first video I showed, this is our database editor. It's our web-based browser used for helping develop content and taking a look at all the different components within our game. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look up Cogsnibble. Let's see. He is in Temple Street, so I'll go to Temple Street. And he is considered a spawn, which you can see I'm here within the spawn section, and he is an NPC. But all objects within the game are technically a spawn. But we're just going to focus on Sparzit. And as you can see, there's a whole list of NPCs here. I'm just going to come to the top here. Let's go to Sparzit right there. And this is Sparzit's page. So I'm not going to go into too much detail. I talked about this in the first video, but as you can see here, we have all these tabs here at the top. This is all the components that make Sparzit who he is. Script is where we're going to be doing a lot of our work right now. So as you can see here, this says, okay, I can put this script here, spawn scripts, Temple Street, Sparzit, and then Lua. So we are going to attribute this to all NPCs with this ID. This is Sparzit's ID number. So anytime I spawn Sparzit, no matter where he is in the world, he's going to have this script associated with him. Okay. And here we are. We're digging into the script. These are the 3 default functions that are populated into our scripts right now. Just to kind of go through them real quick. function spawn. So every time Sparzit spawns, or at least the initial spawn, this is where I can create an entire rule set. Where if something needs to occur, if he needs to start rolling on the floor laughing, or if he needs to just explode or run across the zone, I can put that all in there if I want to. And let's say he was a killable NPC and I could respawn him after, let's say, 5 minutes. Well, that's when the respawn function kicks in. And as you can see, when he respawns, he triggers the spawn function. So it comes up here. And then the main one for discussions we're going to be using mostly today is going to be function hailed. So anytime you hail an NPC, it's going to face target, or at least this particular one, if the script is applied. So let's head back into the game and we'll take a look at him responding to the script. Ideally, he'll face target. So come down here. Okay, I've reloaded spawns and I've reloaded the spawn scripts. Technically, I should be doing that the other way around. Let's check this out. Okay, so I hailed him and he faced me. And that is our interaction, just to kind of get things started. So a very basic way to kind of enhance this is, so more than just facing target, I could tell him to say, and he'll just say, hello world. Very basic. Okay, I saved, submitted. Let's see what happens here. I'm going to reload spawn scripts again. We'll be doing that a lot here. He said, hello world. There it is. Okay, so just to kind of give you a rundown on the way this function stuff works. So I'm approaching this as if you don't know anything, so you can skip through this if you need to. But so for instance, in hailed, it says here at the top NPC, comma, spawn. So it's exposing these two parameters. We're going to focus on who is performing the action and who the action is going to. So for instance, face target, who is facing target? The NPC is going to face the spawn. And here on say, who is saying this? It is the NPC. There is another parameter available for this. I could put spawn at the end, and what's happening here is only the spawn will hear hello world coming from the NPC. But that isn't always the case on some of our functions or our commands, but that is applicable here. Now, to get into the nitty-gritty of this, I mentioned earlier we're going to be using the Dialog Module. So what that is, like I said, it's a rule set. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this because we don't need him to say hello world. He has a whole dialogue associated with a quest. Now, we have our dialogue parser. I'm going to pull that up here. So in our admin section, under build dialogues, all the collections of different dialogues we have stored within the database can be found here. So I can go to a different zone depending on if we have it available. We'll go to Temple Street, let's say. And these are the NPCs that we currently have. Let's go ahead. We'll go to Sparzit. That's cool. Okay, so this is what it just parsed for me in the collection of things I had. You'll notice it looks very similar to the file we just used, but what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy this for right now. I know it's not accurate because it doesn't have all the components I'm looking for, but it'll do for what I'm trying to demonstrate here. So let's go ahead, let's paste this, and we'll work with this. Now, I said we're working on the dialog module. This is not technically using the module. We will get to that here in just a moment, but I'll explain what was going on here. So, what you'll see here is it says hailed, and it uses this function random greeting. Well, coming down here, you'll see random greeting is down here, and it's like, well, what is this? So what this is going to do is it's going to, in this area, local, it's going to use this word choice. And every time it sees the word choice, it's equal to make random int 1, 3. So what that means is choice is going to become a random number ranging between 1 and 3. So when this function is called, 1 and 3, so if choice, or a random number, is 1, it's going to play this particular voiceover. If it's 2, it's going to play this one. If it's 3, it's going to play this one. And you'll see there's ends obviously at the end. So this if statement is going to be tied to this end. So if I hit this little arrow here on the left, it's going to collapse it. So everything within that if statement has been collapsed into that section. So it makes it a little bit easier to navigate. And then obviously there's more, so you can collapse that even further. If that end function isn't there, it's going to give you an error. You'll see like, oh, I'm expecting an end function. Well, you can't have a working function without all the proper closing statements. But as you can see here, there are these things called PlayFlavors going on. And I'll explain what that is. There's a lot going on here. But let's just see what happens when we apply this. So it's going to pull from a random number of things. Reloading spawn scripts. He should play a voice.
Those voices. Why do I keep hearing those maddening voices? Hey, do you hear the voices? Those voices. Why do I keep hearing those maddening voices?
So as you can see, he is saying a line of dialogue. He's saying something above his head. That is exactly what we wanted to do. You'll notice he isn't facing us anymore. It's because we got rid of the face target part of the script. So we'll deal with that. But this is a really great opportunity to talk about this concept of PlayFlavor, which is used all over the emulator. And it's something very important if you're looking to script something. It helps really condense an entire interaction with an NPC. I'm just going to type this out. PlayFlavor. Okay. So we want NPC to do that. I'm going to give you a blank template of what this looks like. Okay. Ignore the X. So we've got PlayFlavor, NPC. The next set of parentheses is going to be the location of a voiceover if it's applicable. So for instance, I can tell this is Sparsit just because of the name of the file. This is when the game was created. These files are organized by someone and they decided this is the way I want to actually name it. As you can see, this is a call out. And this is just purely the naming component of it. I know this is what's going to be said when a player approaches the NPC and the NPC has maybe a quest. They're going to call out this particular function. The next section, the next set of parentheses, is what's actually said above the character's head. So those voices, why do I keep hearing those maddening voices? That's going to be above the head. The next set of parentheses, the last set of the three, is where you'd actually put an emote, like an emotion action, that kind of thing. So if I put crazy, I'm going to put it in all three of these so you can actually see it in action. And just for giggles, I'm going to comment that out. Let's see what happens here. I'm going to reload spawn scripts. He should perform an emote now that I put that in there.
Those voices. Why do I keep hearing those maddening voices?
As you can see, he put his hands up. That is performing the crazy emote. Speaking of emotes, I want to just take a quick minute to talk about why we're using the actual descriptor words for the emote rather than the ID of the actual visual state. So a visual state, such as crazy, is going to have an ID number associated with it. But depending on what client you're using, being it Desert of Flames or Altar of Malice, it'll use a different ID. So using the descriptor word, or the technical term string, is going to be able to flip back and forth between clients regardless, and the client itself will interpret it into what it needs to be. Now if you're looking at what possible states there are, or you're curious about the ID numbers, we have a wiki page. Here it is wiki.eq2emu.com, and there are reference lists here for IDs such as your class list, race, language, and then appearance IDs. These are the ones I'm talking about. So for instance, we're looking at the crazy emote, and this is a list of Desert of Flame client IDs. So I'm going to just go to find crazy, see what the first one is. Okay, the crazy ID for Desert of Flames is 217. Okay, well, let's look at Altar of Malice. Let's see what they're dealing with. So if I go to find crazy, we're already above 217 where we were. And the actual crazy emote ID is much higher. So as you can see, if you don't actually specify the string and you just give it the ID number, a client is going to miss out. So this is how we're able to facilitate cross-client play, having the same kind of experience. All right, so let's keep that in mind and let's return to PlayFlavors. And then the last thing, you'll see these large sequence of numbers if there's a voiceover applied. Here I have 0 and 0. That means nothing's going to happen there. But voiceovers in Everquest 2 are encrypted, and they have two keys appropriated to each voiceover. And what that means is if you don't have the keys, you can't hear the voiceover. Now, if you're playing the game, what happens is if the player initiates an action or the voiceover is heard by the player, the game is actually giving the player the 2 keys. So that's how we actually have some of the keys, because it's like, okay, we're playing the game, the keys are given to us, we already have them. Okay, so that's how we're able to see this. And then finally, like in the save function when I mentioned it earlier, the spawn at the end is actually going to be who is hearing the PlayFlavor. So if I were to get rid of this, like let's say I got rid of spawn here, what happens is this entire function is heard by everyone in the area. So if you wanted something to be an area effect of sorts, in terms of some sort of ecology, which is what we're working with here, that would be the way to approach it. And then lastly, there's a number sometimes at the end of our spawn or our PlayFlavor function. And the number is associated with a language. So for instance, the racial languages early on in the game all had unique characters to them. I'm going to, just for giggles, we're going to just attribute a random language. And what this is going to do is I'm going to still hear the voiceover. It's going to sound like it does in English, but the text above his head will be in a different language. So spawn scripts, reloaded. There it is. So for instance, this is the language of magic. I can tell that from the symbols that are there, but that's how you're actually able to attribute that. Now, there's an entirely different process in order creating a collection of unintelligible voiceovers. I've created one called Garbled, but that's something we're not going to worry about today, but I just want to kind of show you how to control how the language looks. All right. And if you picked up on it already, I've commented this out on PlayFlavor with 2 dashes. If you don't want the function to read a certain component of your text, you just put 2 dashes. It's a great way to deal with that. Another way to do this is if you have a large section of text, let's say I want to get rid of this entire function of random greeting, I can put brackets around an entire area. And as you can see, this entire area is now commented out. It's not going to apply when you actually load the function again. So if you just want to keep an area and not actually have it load, it's a great option. Okay, so we have all these tools in our back pocket now, but what I want to do is actually use the Dialog Module. And that is when you have a straight up dialogue with an NPC in game. And it's exchanging responses and possibly getting something out of it. Very different than having a dialogue bubble above an NPC's head. But obviously here we're lacking, so I'm going to pull up a different NPC that I know actually works. I'm going to go to the Babbleshire and look up a geologist who I know uses a lot of different commands. So what we've got here is the geologist in Babbleshire, and you'll notice right at the top there's a new line of code that says require spawn scripts / generic / dialog module. So what this does is it's going to require, when this script loads on an NPC, to also load this one for the NPC to use. It's going to know the rule set for the dialog module. Great. Okay. And I'm going to just actually grab one of the geologist functions and put it over here. Now, I'm going to collapse random greeting because really it's not going to be of use for us. We need to actually use a dialogue. And so this function that I pulled, like you'll see, there's a whole bunch of different ones here for this geologist. The one that I pulled is just going to be our template for now. So just to kind of give you a rundown, the function dialog1, it's coming from an NPC and going to a spawn. And spawn in this sense is the player. Now we can actually type the word player, but we then have to, we then have to make sure player is in every single one of these. But for right now, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to just use spawn. What this does is, okay, as you come down the list, the order of these things is very important. As you come down the list, it's going to face target. The NPC is going to then start a new dialogue. And the dialogue itself, the NPC will say what is in add dialogue. So these rocks here are interesting. And then after that, a voiceover is played. And as you can see, the voiceover here has the 2 separate keys. you can see that this particular NPC, it happens to be a gnome, so it's speaking gnomish. And then a player's response is dialogue add option. And the player can then say, have fun with your rocks, I'm not interested. So, and then at the very bottom of that section of dialogue is dialogue start. So it's going to look at creating a new dialogue, it's going to work all the way through, and then dialogue start comes at the bottom because then it knows to encapsulate everything there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the dialog1 function name here and replace our greetings. Because we don't need a random greeting, we want to actually have a dialogue. Okay, so let's just check this out. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to go back to the game. Let's reload spawn scripts, and he should say something different now.
These rocks here are interesting. I'm not sure where they came from. It's rather strange. They simply don't
So you can
fit
see
this area
that we
at
have
all.
the entire input from that particular little section of dialogue that we put in. And the response is, have fun with your rocks, I'm not interested. You click that, and the dialogue ends. So, all right, so other important things to note here is if you wanted to edit this, obviously we can make this NPC say whatever we want. If the voiceover doesn't work for you, you can always comment it out, or you can just delete it entirely. Like for instance, if I don't want him to speak Gnomish, I can just get rid of it. And other options, there's a whole list of dialogue components you can use. Add emote helps apply the crazy emote, but at the same time, I could also use a PlayFlavor instead of emote. And for now, I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of the add emote. But let's say we wanted to actually have this line of dialogue go to another section, so the player's response actually makes a difference. Well, then I can just add another option. I can change the response here to whatever text I want. So, what is so interesting about these rocks? And then I put a comma, and then the next parameter should be the next function that I want to call from hitting this option. Well, I don't have it made yet, but I'm just going to copy, paste. I'm going to change it to dialog2. I'm going to say, I don't really know, I just love rocks. I'm going to get rid of these responses from the player. Okay then. And I'll make him shrug. So let's just see, make sure it still works. Reload spawn scripts. He won't be playing the voiceover. These rocks are interesting. Okay, what's so interesting about these rocks? I don't know. I just love rocks. Okay then. So there it is. It worked. So that's going to be the basic setup for this dialogue. So let's just take a second. I'm going to fill in this dialogue with how the NPC is supposed to respond.
A few minutes later.
All right, and we're back. So I've gone ahead, I've populated Sparzit's script. I filled him full of dialogue. I've connected him to his script for his quest, and I've even created his final dialogue for this first quest he offers. So just to kind of explain what's happening here, our hail function is still dialog1, and we're coming down here. You can see that he's doing this bit of dialogue. He has his voiceover, he's playing an emote, and then I put an if statement here so we can track and see if the player can receive the quest, and if they progress the quest for a bit, then it gives another option. So for instance, if a player hasn't received a quest, hasn't completed it, and actually meets all the prerequisites, they can receive the quest. And what I've done here at the top is I've created this local option, so every time this script sees the word teeth, it's pulling in this ID number, and this ID number is actually connected to the quest I made in part 1 of this demonstration. So what it's saying here is if you can receive the quest, if the player, the spawn, can receive quest teeth, then this dialogue option is available. So it's asking what voices are you talking about, so we go to step 2. And then if the player has the quest, and then they are on quest step 4, the player is on this quest step 2, notice there's 2 equal signs, then this option says, here are some fine snake teeth you asked for. So, kind of moving through here, you'll see Dialog 2 goes into the second bit of dialogue with these options. Dialog 3 is filtered in so it cascades down. And then this one here, I have it saying offer. So when they get to the Dialog 3 option, the player is being offered a quest. So the NPC faces the player and then offer quest. Who is offering the quest? The NPC is offering the quest to the player, and the quest they're offering is teeth. And then finally, if they have the teeth, we're going to the quest 1 is done function, and you'll see it's the same kind of bit of dialogue here. And then here, set step complete. So they're saying the player on step 2, the quest step complete is number 2. So if you watch the first part of all this, you saw me make the quest, and I only had 1 step in that quest. Well, I've flushed it out, and what you'll see here, so I'm now back on the quest we were working with in part 1 called Teeth for Sparzit. And basically you had to go to the sprawl to kill snakes for a perfect pair of snake fangs. And from there it went to complete. Well, I added a step, so it now says once you complete step 1, it's going to update saying I found these fangs, I've collected a pair of fangs, and then you need to go to Temple Street. And so step 2, I need to speak with Sparzit in Temple Street. So that is what the quest is looking for step 2. And if the player is on step 2, this is what it'll pull up. So this function here, set step complete for step 2, will complete this function, and then it goes to quest complete. Another thing just to notice here for quests is you can actually add the dialog module to the quest script itself. And this is how, when a player accepts a quest, the dialogue continues immediately. There's no break. So what we've done here is loaded the require function, and then in accepted within the quest script, you'll see it has the same kind of setup with the dialogue, the voiceover, the PlayFlavor. I see something already. What you'll notice though, I've changed where it says NPC and spawn. It has to coincide with how the function parameters are exposed. So quest giver is replacing NPC, and player is replacing spawn. So this just applies to quests. So I'm going to save that. Okay, so this should work. Everything we've done here, it should work. And then once you've got your update and you're able to tell him you got your teeth, and ideally he will then offer you the reward once you turn it in. Okay, last thing I need to do here is, we'll notice that he's offering a quest, but he doesn't have a quest feather. Let's make it so he provides the quest. So up here in the spawn function at the very top, provides quest NPC teeth. So that means this NPC is providing that particular quest, and if the player meets all the prerequisites for the quest, they will see the quest feather. Reload spawn scripts and reload spawns. Aha! So there is our quest feather. So let's take a look at this.
What? Oh, of course I would like a beer.
There's dialogue
All
option
of those
1.
nasty little voices are so much easier to ignore. Ooh, just the voice that whispers in my
Dialogue
ear while I whip up
option 2.
gadgets. They say things like, more spikes! I'm building a contraption to
Dialogue
solve an
option
annoying
3.
problem.
And
Living
then
in such a
this next one should
small
offer the
neighborhood,
quest.
people constantly barge into my home,
You can see the
thinking it's
rewards,
theirs.
description,
In turn,
accept
I'm
the quest,
creating
and
a
he should say
clockwork
one more
snake that keeps... I'm trying to make teeth for my snake, but the ones I make snap off after puncturing the victim's skin.
All right.
A real ass.
And just for the last test, let's make sure he is actually able to update the quest. All right, I've spawned a few snakes. Let me see if I can get this update real quick. Okay, so I have killed a few snakes, got the update, got the quest book above his head because I've designated him as the second step's ID to go to, and ideally,
What? Oh, of course I would
here's
like
some
a
of
beer.
the
All
fine
of those
snake teeth you
nasty
asked
little
for.
voices are so much
this should
easier to
update it.
ignore after I've had
Most
a
likely
few.
in the Desert of Flames
No,
client, we
serve
will
up my
not
good
see
rat.
this book go away right away. That'll change eventually, but...
Let's see.
Oh, it did.
Yes,
Fantastic.
these
And
teeth are
here's our
very
reward.
basic.
All right, everyone, thank you for sticking through this with me. I know it was a lot of information, but honestly, this is what it takes to help rebuild these quests, these dialogues. And if you're looking for more information, feel free. You can message us on Discord, and if you have more interest, I'll probably post other videos too on how-tos on, for instance, NPC movements as well as other types of scripting. Thank you for your interest, and we'll see you around as we rebuild the world.